I'm going to just give you a little bit of an introduction as to what London's poverty profile is and what Trust for London is. So I'm the Director of Policy at Trust for London. Trust for London is an independent charitable foundation. So we are lucky enough to sit on an endowment which allows us to give out about £10 million a year to organisations in London that are tackling the root causes of poverty and inequality. We fund lots of organisations working on the ground. We also fund some research organisations, universities, think tanks, and we also produce London's poverty profile, which we've been doing for over a decade now. And really, the reason it came about because there were, at the time, when I wasn't at the trust, but at the time there was a realisation there wasn't really an independent source of data on poverty and inequality. Much of it was produced by local authorities or the GLA or others, and we wanted to bring something that was independently created, free from government, and to provide a resource really to civil society and others are out there. Typically, it's been a report that's released every 2 years, very thick report. About the last one, the one in 2017 was about 147 pages. It's essentially graphs, tables, and lots of text explaining what that data says. It's quite economic in its nature and can sometimes be very difficult to absorb. It's certainly not a document you could have read front page to back page, really. It's a sort of reference document. And we released that roughly sort of every 2 years or so and had the website alongside it. We think it's primarily used by, I think, organisations who are working in the charity sector who are making a case for funding. I think that's a really big use for it. People use the data in funding applications. And that's probably how we envisage our sort of core audience for it. But it's also used by people in local authorities, the GLA and other areas of government to essentially help create policy. So a typical use may be a sort of policy officer who takes the data and puts it in a briefing they're writing for a councillor, for example, or for a particular initiative that they want to do, helps them make the case again around tackling elements of poverty and inequality. It's also used a lot by journalists. So if you Google poverty in London, journalists will often do that when they're researching stories, and they'll come to the data and they'll either use the data directly or they'll speak to us. Often we then refer them on to the organisations we fund to combine the data with stories of people on the ground. But it's a really important resource for them, and that's a good sort of key audience for us. And finally, it's used quite a lot by students as well who are studying, and that's sort of, unfortunately, a secondary audience, but they get a lot of benefit from it, sort of too, for us as well. And as I said, it was typically a big document that was released sort of every 2 years. And we've made some changes in the last sort of 18 months or so. So we realized that, I mean, most people were accessing this data via the web. And you may find it interesting that as a funder, this is by far the most popular aspect of our website. It's not the how do we get funding pages. That's only 2% of our website. This is 50% of the visitors to our website accessing data. So it's really a core sort of service I think we provide. So we wanted to beef up the online offering, make it easier to navigate, to improve the frequency that we updated data. So it wasn't every 2 years or so. It's pretty much going to be every 2 or 3 months, depending on which indicators have new data available, and that's certainly the model we're moving towards. So you get much more up-to-date sort of data. We've also added in more sophisticated maps, more sophisticated graphics, and that's a trajectory we're going on. So we're hoping the sort of usability of it improves, the ability to digest information more easily improves, and the quality of the data improves as well over time. So that's sort of where we're heading with it. We'll still produce a sort of PDF report. And we did one released in April time, which is a much shorter, about sort of 60 pages or so, much more graphic, much more oriented around graphics, and the text is pared down, so hopefully much more easy to understand, and something you could potentially read from cover to cover. I also should say that all of the data at the moment is pre-COVID data. You won't go to London's poverty profile or any of the other any of the other sort of sources of poverty and inequality data in the country and find much on COVID. That's because a lot of the data on here uses sources that are only collected maybe every 12 months, 18 months or so. And the last surveys that would have been conducted would have been last year. So particularly around poverty data, you probably won't see any direct COVID-related sort of data for at least another 12 to 18 months or so around the sort of official government poverty stats. And that's because it's collected from various surveys which have to be conducted. There may be some delays because surveys normally are conducted in the household, so they'll have to find new methodology to do it. So unfortunately, it's a snapshot of what life was like before COVID. And actually, poverty data has always been something that's on a trajectory. So it's been fairly flat over sort of 20-year cycles or so. Very rarely any spikes up or down with particular indicators. That may well be different now. We may well be sort of having a once in 20-year, once in 30-year spike in, obviously, assuming a negative direction for some of these data points. Some of the more frequently updated data is around things like universal credit claimants, unemployment, and that stuff we will update as and when it becomes available. But what you will find out around COVID from us in the sort of next few months or so, and from other organisations, particularly things like organisations like the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Resolution Foundation, you will find that they're releasing lots of reports on the impact of COVID. Much of it using polling, so specific surveys conducted around the impact of polling, asking people questions. We have some stuff coming out soon on the impact of COVID on low-paid workers, asking them what the impact was on their finances, how they coped, and you'll find quite a lot of that data out there already and more being released in the future, as well as some studies which will look at real-time bank account data to see actually what has been the actual impact. So rather than asking people's opinions, what do you think the impact has been, actually seeing the hard data. And there was a report, I think last week, from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which looked at that UK-wide, and we'll have a London-wide sort of cut of that report coming out, I think, in the next month or so. So fortunately, yes, you can't come to this at the moment and see what the impact of COVID is, but I think we can all assume that COVID has exacerbated existing inequalities and existing aspects of deprivation. So it's safe to assume that by what the data is saying. I'm going to talk you through the screen here. This is the data section of the Trust for London website. So if you just go to trustforlondon.org.uk/data, this is the page you will come at. Gives you a short overview of what the compendium is. As I said, there are over 100 indicators. So Trust for London is the funder. We're kind of like a project manager for this. But we work with fantastic partners. WPI Economics, they're the statisticians, they're the economists who do all the crunching of the data, and it's a lot of work. And I can't answer lots of the technical questions around the data. They're the people who can do that. So if you have any technical questions, I could probably take it, I can't answer, I could take it back to them and send you an answer separately. We're also working with the Consumer Data Research Centre at UCL to do two things. One is to do really good mapping. So you see some maps on the site, which I'll show you in a second. And those will hopefully, again, increase in volume and sophistication in the future. And they also have access to different kinds of data sources. So most of the indicators on London's poverty profile use sort of official data, let's call it, quite very robust, high levels of integrity collected by government or academic institutions. Consumer Data Research Centre actually have lots of data from businesses. So they'll have data about from Rightmove or data from utilities companies. And we're keen to explore what kind of insight that can provide into poverty and inequality in London, particularly when you combine it with some of the more official sources. And we're only at the early stages of that kind of exploration at the moment. This year, hopefully we'll do things like explore how gentrification looks through some of this data and how neighbourhood change looks through some of this data, which is a very complex topic, which lots of people working in the sector are really keen on. It's not a clean-cut picture, depending on where you look. So hopefully we'll do that. So what I'm going to do is show you how you navigate some of this data. So you can explore it in different kinds of ways. So we have 3 ways of doing it. One is via the sort of topics, the issues. One is via population, so that's a different demographic groups. And thirdly, it's by boroughs. Either click on any of these links here, but what I like to do is if you go to the top and click on data and click the down arrow, you can use this navigation tool to, again, go through things. So if you want to find topics, you click on topics, and then you have the various sort of, topics here. Some of them are very self-explanatory: housing, work and benefits, others living standards, shared opportunities. You might need to explore them a little bit to find the exact sort of data you're interested in. And the different populations, which is often how people want to view this data. So around different ethnic groups, gender, age groups, working status, and so forth. And then obviously the sort of borough data, which I'll talk about separately before we get on. But I just wanted to talk you through. Sorry, there's also, you can access the document here. So if you click on the full report, it takes you to the latest report, which is here, which is probably a good starting point, really. And it will talk you through the key aspects of data. And what you'll see in here is lots of sort of tables, and I'm going quite fast here, and graphics, which you might be able to sort of screenshot and use in presentations and so forth. But I want to talk you through just how to access some of the data on the website. So if I go to, so I'm going to look at the particular topic. So I'm going to go to people here, and that's the sort of demographics of London. What do we know about the broad sort of demographic data? Here at the top here, it gives you a brief sort of intro as to what the theme is. So it says the people theme gives an overview of the demography and diversity of London. And it's a sort of starting point when you want to get the sort of headline stats. And what we have here then on the left is all of the different indicators that you can access under this theme. Again, it might require a bit of exploration. Then on the right here, you have a sort of snippet of the data. So if you just wanted to have a quick look at the graph, you could have a look at the graph there, and you can sort of get the exact number by hovering over it. I'll go into more detail in a second around this. If you really want to understand more, you can click on read more, and it will take you to the page, which has the explanation at the bottom here, which is often hopefully very easy to understand, and you can lift that straight from this if you want to put it into other documents as well. But I think the thing that people find most useful is generally the graphic and the graphs and the data. And I just want to talk you through a couple of things here. I'm going to go to an interesting indicator. Here you see there's a great many, and it does require some searching, I think, to find what you're looking for if you have a specific thing you're interested in. And I'm going to go to see if I can find it. Life expectancy by London Borough. This is, I find it's interesting because it's often one of the stories you hear about inequality in London, isn't it? So, you know, this borough has a much lower life expectancy than that borough, or the north of this borough has a much lower life expectancy than the south of this borough. And it's quite a common sort of go-to reference point for inequality and poverty. What you have here is the graph. I just want to show you a few things of the graph. Obviously, you can hover over the above here. This has an interesting, actually, just about this indicator has an interesting nuance, which is healthy life expectancy. Often we talk about life expectancy. The healthy life expectancy is how many years do you expect to live healthy? You could live to 90, but the last 20 years of your life could be in a pretty poor state. And is that really a great measure? What you really want to measure perhaps is how many years of good quality life do you have? And that's what we've sort of majored on here. And you can see some of the boroughs earlier on, Hackney and Tower Hamlets, that were at the sort of bottom of the sort of poverty, the stats coming up there. But what I wanted to show you is a few things. So we often get requests from people to understand, where does this data come from? What's the source of this data here? So the most obvious, the best way to find that is by clicking here on show graph details. If you click on that, you'll get a little box that comes up, which will give you the sort of the statisticians notes. So this one is explaining what's going on with that indicator, what it means, where the data comes from. Sometimes the data source will have a specific year in, but here the title has got the year in, so you know when that data is from, and then where the chart is from. Sometimes charts may be taken from an outside source, so this is something that's been created ourselves. So that's really, really important for you guys, I think, to not take this as at face value. Understand the integrity of the data. Where does it come from? What are the sources of it? What year was it? And because that's really, really important to improve sort of and understand that elements of data literacy. yeah, you can, and this is probably not a very well used sort of feature, but you can share the data on Twitter or on sort of Facebook. And then I think what people find really useful is to be able to download things. So you can do two things here. You can download you can sort of print it straight away. You can download a picture of it. So if I click export JPEG there at the bottom, you'll see it's been downloaded. If I click on that, hopefully you'll see that? Yeah, so you'll see the graph. So you can, again, put that into a presentation, put that into a document. It means you don't have to do any screenshots or anything like that. You've got it all. Then it has all the references in there. I find it really handy for that. You'll see in the presentation I'm going to give earlier on, they're all screenshotted. But I wanted to show you just a bit of nuance about this graph, which you might not realize. And is actually these things here are buttons at the bottom. So you can turn these on or off, depending on what you want to see. So if you're not interested in general life expectancy, you could turn it off. And there you can just look at the healthy life expectancy of various boroughs. And then if you click download chart again, and click sort of export JPEG, it should, fingers crossed, only show the buttons that you got on or off. So again, it allows you to tailor the data a little bit more to the sort of needs that you have. And I think again, if some of those of you who want to explore the data in a bit more detail, if you can download the spreadsheet that the chart is based upon. So you can click here, export CSV. The CSV file is the thing that Excel and other spreadsheet packages will read. So it comes at the bottom, and hopefully that will open. It's trying to open in something different. But here you go. So you can see that's the table that the data is derived, that the graph is derived from. So, and it has obviously some of the technical aspects. So these are the codes for, I'm not sure what they are, either boroughs or, yeah, they're the borough codes. And then you've got the table here. So you can use that data in different ways if you wanted to cut the graph in a different way, or just add the table in specifically. So I think those are the ways in which I think that most people use the website to access and use the data, other than just reading it to make it to use it in a particular way. You can also hopefully in some pages you keep scrolling down, there'll be more indicators on the same page. And yeah. I wanted to show you some maps as well, because that's obviously a feature we've invested in at the moment. And again, it allows you to, so, I mean, most of this data is at either the London-wide level or the borough level. And very little of it can go down to sort of neighborhood level, what's called either lower super output area or middle super output areas, for those of you who are familiar with ONS sort of classifications, geographical classifications. So where possible, we're going to start trying to include much more neighborhood level data where it exists. And I'm just going to figure out where a map is that I can show you, and add that to the website. So you can perhaps explore, if you're working in a particular neighborhood or in a particular borough, you can just have an easy way of visualizing some of that data here. So I'm just going to, it won't be obvious to you until you've gone into these indicators about what you can see. So this is one of our maps, which is looking at obviously I'm sure many of you will have used the index for multiple deprivation in your work for various sort of reasons. This has mapped the index for multiple deprivation for London. So it's what we've done is we've rebased it for London, and what that means is instead of comparing areas in London with the UK, how well they are in England, sorry, it's compared it just in London. So instead of the top 10% of deprived neighbourhoods in England, what the sort of red areas are showing here is the top 10% of deprived areas if you just compare within London and the least sort of deprived areas. And you can zoom into various sort of neighbourhoods. I'm somewhere over here. And you can again just see a bit more detail about what it's like in your own neighbourhood. And these are buttons at the top here. So if you want to just see Let's do it the other way around. Let's see the really wealthiest areas. You can see there that sort of the least deprived areas are highlighted, and again you can switch these on and off. And again you can do the same thing. You can export the data behind it. You can print it off. You can export a picture of it and add that to any kind of presentation or a document that you might be sort of using for. And there are several of these sort of dotted through the profile, and there'll be more added over time. And you can see here when the last update was taken place. What we're going to be doing, hopefully in the next few weeks or so, is having a release schedule. So for those of you who are really interested in the latest data, you'll be able to see when we'll be updating various indicators. So you can access that as soon as it sort of becomes available. A lot of people are interested in borough level data. Obviously, we had a question about neighbourhood level, lower super out areas. But borough level data is really, really important to a lot of people. What we used to do with boroughs is rank them. So it was the most popular page on our website, 1 to 32, which is the best, which is the worst, give them a kick in, you know, really good stuff. And we got rid of it actually, temporarily, because it wasn't the most scientifically constructed sort of index. It was like, you know, if you were at the bottom and your poverty rate is 28%, and you were one above that and your poverty rate was 27.00009. It's not a massive difference. So saying one is better than the other is probably a bit unfair. So what we're going to be doing going forward is looking at how we can compare boroughs that are similar to one another. So you have a bit more context to be able to understand how well is that borough doing. It's not really, comparing Tower Hamlets to Richmond isn't really going to tell you anything about the world. It's not really fair. But comparing it to similar boroughs that have similar demographics, similar challenges, it gives you a better understanding perhaps about be able to judge how that local authority is performing. So what we do have around boroughs, and I put some barking and dagging here, is just all the data we have on that particular borough collated into one place. So it's the same categories as before, and what you get is a color coding as to whether it's a bit better than average, worse than average, or about the same. So here you've got a good mix of the two. So green suggests it's better, and so forth. So you can have a look at the borough data there. There'll be we're going to do much more work on this in the next few months or so, and we will release a specific report on boroughs, hopefully in the autumn, which will have more data. And what we hope we can do is give a poverty rate for different boroughs, because at the moment the data on poverty rates for boroughs is from 2014. It's estimated, it's not actual data. It's using a model created by I can't remember which department, ONS, I imagine. And that's because the questionnaires that give us the poverty level figure doesn't have a high enough sample size for London. So it doesn't have enough people responding to those questionnaires in each borough for us to be able to have that sort of robust answer as to what the poverty rate is. So what we hope to do is, with our sort of economists, do sort of some statistical work and create a new model which gives an updated estimate on what the poverty rate in different boroughs is. And we hope to be able to do that. We don't know if we can do that, but we hope to be able to do that in the autumn time. A lot of it, if you want the technical data, a lot of it relies on accessing data that you have to go to the ONS offices into a little safe room, because it's sort of secure data to be able to access the data. And obviously with COVID, that's much more difficult.